You know what, E? This morning I was waking up and I was kind of just like scrolling through some things and trying to see. And the first alert on my phone was about what happened with Tony D and Stacks last night in NXT. And immediately I shot up. Like that's how my eyes opened this morning. And I was thinking about you, E. You were E, you were one of the first people to run through my mind this morning. For the rest of you, hi. How's it going? What's up, Leo? What's up, E? What's up, all the rest of you coming into the chat? It's Wednesday. So, just like we always do, or just like we occasionally do, sorry about that last week, ended up working late. We ended up working late so I could have the next day off. That's how holidays work, right? So, I had to scrap all of my Goldberg rants from last week. I'll recook those takes. Goldberg content's kind of at a premium, okay? So I'll wait to rant and rave on Goldberg and Gunther probably 2 weeks from now. In the meantime, how's it going? It's Wednesday. I'm Rob, spelled somewhat like it is down there in the lower third, and this is the Nocturnal Knockout, our weekly meeting where we like to go over the fun stuff in pro wrestling, the frivolous stuff in pro wrestling. What's up? You guys asking for RVD? Is RVD, are we double booked with RVD? Is he supposed to go live on his Twitter at the same time? So those of you who are questioning where RVD is, welcome into Brass Ring Media. Brass Ring Media is a wrestling media network full of great creators and former pro wrestlers, many of ECW flavor that you can catch on here. And we also stream on RVD's Twitter account. Oh, that's right. E, that is tonight. Yeah. So you know what? People are probably looking for that. So if you are searching any information on that, go to all the descriptions in old Rob's socials. Check that out. And yeah, congratulations to him and Katie Forbes having twins. That's wild. It's gonna be just these. I have these little tiny like kids doing these flips and these kicks. Nice to meet you too, Cage. Nice to meet you. I can see that being very jarring for someone when you're just here on on someone's Twitter account and you're like you throw it on, you're like, who the hell is that guy? It's some loser to no effects hat who's going to talk to you about his problem with Night of Champions. That is what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to a couple of things to talk about because I think we have some big things coming up. Night of Champions seems like it's going to happen. The big Smackdown from Riyadh has to happen at this point for all things to make sense. But I got a problem with this year's card. I got a specific problem, a few specific problems with the card this year. So I want to discuss that. I want to tease that out with you guys. And then what I want to do after I tell you all about that is we have a big era coming to an end this Friday. I want to acknowledge the end of that era and recap other eras. So if you catch my drift of what I'm gonna talk about there, that's what we call a tease, folks. I know I'm not making a whole ton of sense. And then maybe we'll close the show with a business opportunity for someone. I have something really to present out there, folks. All right. Before we get into it, as I mentioned, I am Rob. This is Brass Ring Media. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on YouTube, of course, and you could always become a member. We've been cranking out some actual. What's up, Jermaine? What's up, UK? Been cranking out some members content lately. There's an analysis on the pipe bomb, as well as the new pipe bomb, Cena's pipe bomb. Additionally, there's a Money in the Bank review members only style. A membership takes care of you there. You get all that premium top shelf wrestling analysis if you become a member. So go ahead and do that. All right, let me rant and rave right now about something. Water sipping. Okay. So for the past like 8 years, we've all had to adjust to the Saudi element in our wrestling, in our WWE wrestling in particular. And it's been rough, right? Every time one of these shows pops up, the storylines, like the story of what's happening between the bell, that's not usually what we're talking about. We're usually talking about the implications of these shows, the money at stake on these shows, the cultural conflict that sometimes emerges, and also the geopolitical ramifications of these shows. All of that gets discussed quite often when it comes to these shows. And right now we're in one of those cycles. This has not necessarily been a cycle of a Saudi show where we spent a whole lot of time moralizing. We've called out CM Punk, but that's even been part of the storyline. So that has happened. But with everything kind of going on in the world, I think everyone's been a little bit distracted. Plus, we're living in a little bit different time period than we were back in like 2018 when WWE was kind of the pioneer of the American front-facing entertainment company, sports or entertainment company that was going to work with Saudi Arabia to, debut them on the global stage. And you guys have if you're watching this, you probably have full context of what these Saudi shows serve as and what their purpose is, and ultimately why WWE does them. But, like I said, as the world has kind of burned around us, the discourse around the Saudi shows has kind of waned. Like a lot has happened since it was 2018 and everybody was talking about this all the time. Remember back in the day when like they wouldn't even put up on the graphic where the shows were happening? I don't think so, E. I don't think so. So you'll have to get your post show fix probably somewhere else. Yeah, but you remember that back in the day, like major stars wouldn't be on these shows. There'd be some absences. They would put on Evolution shows as counterbalances, which even they're kind of doing that. But we realized early on with these shows that they were essentially glorified house shows. They were taped, televised house shows with some propaganda messages just kind of slid in between. Even if like major title change were to happen at these shows, as it did in the case of like Brock Lesnar winning his title or Goldberg beating the Fiend over there in Saudi Arabia. Remember that classic? There's a throwback to current TV. They weren't really that important. But then 2020 happened, and a lot of 2020 happened. And the next year, when we returned to some sort of sense of normalcy, the Saudi shows kind of got cooked into just being regular pay-per-views with real matches that you have to pay attention to. And this is actually extra relevant this week, I think, because we've had some reporting from Sean Ross Sapp noting that there used to be like a bonus for going to these Saudi shows, and now it's just simply cooked into their contract, essentially being like any other premium live event. And here we are. We're in 2025, and we're theoretically just a few days away from another one of these just regular shows. Are we? Are we? Now, I got a problem with this Saudi card. And it's not for those copy and paste reasons, justifiable reasons that people normally have a problem with the Saudi card. It's not for the fact that WWE likes to really, or did used to really like to promote their record on women's rights while also dancing around how Saudi Arabia felt about the situation. Now, I'm not going to be critical about that. I'm not going to be critical about WWE basically leasing out their product as commercial space for propaganda for another government that's trying to launder their legacy. I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to be critical of just the card and what we're here at for Night of Champions. What we've been presented with, what we have to chew on this Saturday, just the regular between the rope stuff. I think part of why it's bad is because of the Saudi stuff, but that's not the only thing going on here. In fact, if this is a true Saudi show, the card is loaded with names and matchups that people definitely want to see. But more so than some other years, I feel like this year's Saudi show, it's such a waste of some resources. Some very, very valuable resources. None of that probably made any sense to you guys, but I'm gonna explain what I mean here. So at the core of what I'm getting at is this card on Saturday, it's full of matchups that could be marquee. But the setup through television has not been marquee. Doesn't mean we're in this era of terrible, terrible booking. I'm just saying the build to this card, these matches, hasn't been getting it done. Exactly, Fernando. I'll address that in a second. Now, when you talk about like having matchups that maybe are intriguing but not built well or doesn't feel right, that technically that's always the case when you do something like a King of the Ring tournament, which last year's Saudi show kind of focused all the way around, and it's a big element on this year's Saudi show. Who doesn't love a King of the Ring tournament? Well, except for Vince. Vince apparently hated that, and there were reasons for it. We know though, tournaments in wrestling, they could be kind of boom or bust. I think like if you're a wrestling promoter, you're probably weighing the upside and downside of the popularity of a tournament, the potential for unlimited matchups, and all the excitement that like tournaments in general in all forms of sports, but especially combat sports, can yield. So you're weighing that. You're weighing something like a brand like King of the Ring against the fact that outside of what you have scheduled at that point in the bracket at that time, you can't actually advertise any matchups that don't exist yet. You can imply them, but you really wouldn't be doing a great job as a wrestling promoter if you do this. Allegedly, this is why Vince McMahon didn't like the concept anymore of King of the Ring. And that's why he nixed it back in 2002. And I think this thing with tournaments with Vince goes back a long way. That was a big issue they had with WrestleMania 4, which makes sense of why you had to guarantee on that card that the fans were at least going to get Hulk versus Andre. They were going to get the main event from the year before because you couldn't really advertise the later matches. And quite honestly, I don't know if DiBiase versus Savage would have been the way to go there. Yeah, you know what, boss? Vince also hated wrestling, so he's not the best on that. Triple H is too heavy on tournaments. I agree. You know what, wrestling right now is too heavy on tournaments, Azan. I am so super fatigued with tournaments. Good to see you also, Azan. You too, boss and Fernando. Haven't acknowledged you guys. What's up, Brass Ring Nocturnal crew? Yeah, Vince liked a few things. He really did. So now this whole issue though of tournaments and the lack of advertising them and what they can do in 2025, Papa H and Big Nick K, they have solved this problem. They've done this for a couple of years now. One, they put stakes on King of the Ring. King of the Ring leads to a title shot at WrestleMania. It's essentially the Summer Royal Rumble. And that's kind of cool. I mean, talk about Nixon in 2002. That was a great legacy of 2002 of having that little piece on it. And sometimes that was the case, and other times winning King of the Ring was just to win King of the Ring. Also, despite Triple H's affection for tournaments, he has found a way to not have to worry about selling the tournament of King of the Ring as a concept. Now you get a 6-day build to that match. And that's exactly my problem with this iteration of King of the Ring. Ever since Cody's return at WrestleMania in 2022, outside of getting the title and the implications of that and what that could mean, there's been one main event level match that people have really wanted to see for Cody, that people have been clamoring for. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about the King of the Ring final this Saturday, and that would be Cody Rhodes versus Randy Orton. Legacy explodes. Think of all the implications there. So, like, not only do Cody and Randy have 15 years of on-screen history, they, unlike they did back in 2009 or 2010, 15 years ago. Yeah, 15 years ago. Gosh. 15 years ago was a long time. 2010 was a long time. They are much better at doing what they do. Not to say they were bad back then. It's really easy for me to say, no, yeah, Randy Orton really sucked in 09. What the hell was I doing in 09? What am I doing now? Like, so just for me to say that they sucked back then, that's not the case. Are they much, much better at what they do now? Just like anyone would be better 15 years after perfecting what you're doing? Abso-freaking-lutely. Plus, it was a triple threat back then. Poor Ted. Remember when he was going to face The Undertaker? Remember when Ted was going to break The Undertaker's streak? Those are good times. But in 2025, all we get as a build for this match is we get one SmackDown in Riyadh. SmackDown's hopefully happening in Riyadh, by the way, but that's all we get to build on the history in this first match. Now, some of you guys are putting some interesting stuff in the chat. As Fernando is saying, he said Randy turning heel on Cody after Cody wins. And I get it. This is not going to be the last time we're going to see a match up. This is not part of like the Cena retirement tour where you got to get in a bunch of matches really quick. Randy Orton's in great shape. Who knows how long he's going to be there, but he's there for main event matches. Cody's not going anywhere anytime soon. This will not be the last of it. So I'm not going to pretend like I'm so unsatisfied with all of this. I mean, to your point, E, Cody did wink at turning heel earlier today. That was the other thing. Along with the NXT news, that was the other thing that like what culture and Cultaholic had me going as I was flipping through the channels. Like, okay, that happened on NXT and Cody's turning heel. Great. And then I took another sip of coffee. And I know, as I was saying earlier, Trips is going to cite the lack of build, or if it's, a schmaz match or whatever it is, as just the first chapter in this grand narrative that'll be made much clearer later when we're all made whole. That excuse or that explanation, although I still don't even really buy it for WrestleMania 39, that did probably pan out really, really well at WrestleMania 40. But that was like 18 months ago. And pretty much everything we've got since then, we've been having to live with this narrative. This is just the first page in a chapter of a very long, never-ending book. But it's like, are we ever gonna, get to a climax here? We're gonna get to some intermission here. We got plenty of background, a little bit of rising action, not that much. And it might sound counterintuitive because we know these Saudi cards, they're big deals, they're big money. But this match, as even though it's a King of the Ring final, to determine a title shot, I'm sorry, this match in this positioning like this is too big to happen with a 1 week build. And what are we even doing anyway? This is a side rant having nothing to do with what I'm actually talking about. Why do we have main eventers in King of the Ring? This isn't the G1. King of the Ring is about up-and-comers, right? 94-year-old Randy Orton facing 85-year-old Cody Rhodes. Who beat like Jey Uso, who was talking about his last run not too long ago. What are we doing, guys? What are we doing with King of the Ring right now? I guess there's nothing actually wrong with it, Azan, but it's something I think it just works better. Like, I know like Brett wasn't necessarily an up and comer, but he hadn't been in the main event. But like if you're the king of the ring at the, I don't know, I just think that if you're a main eventer, king of the ring, shouldn't you just be the champion? I mean, ding, ding. You're right, Azan. Brett totally was champion in '92, wasn't he? Yeah. So, and you're right also, Fernando. The Saudi government asks for big stars. When what they ask for, they get. They almost got Yokozuna. They almost got the Ultimate Warrior. I wonder now with like the growth of AI, if we could have a time machine, you think we could get like an AI Yokozuna for the Saudis? And that would have satiated the Crown Prince. I hope I don't get like on a list now or something. I think though your point of the Saudi government is asking for the big stars is what absolutely gives this though the same exact aura of it's the first match in a long feud, but it just happens to take place in Hell in a Cell because it's freaking October. That's what this feels like. I just feel like they could have done better. And with the whole Cody's coming back in this pseudo feud with John Cena. I don't know what the hell's going on. It's just kind of leaving me confused and it's annoying me. Clearly, I'm annoyed by it. I will say though, to be fair, I think they're kind of getting it right in the women's division. I know people were frightened with Jade's wrestling on Monday, but like having it be Asuka versus Jade for the Queen of the Ring title, that feels like a more King of the Ring, Queen of the Ring. That feels a little better. So kudos on that. It's not often that WWE will get any praise for women's booking. Do they have a champ? Is Becky like the women's champ? Like the main champ? Because I think they have another champ on that show, but I haven't seen her in a while. They do, right? Or is this for a shot at Tiffany's belt? Tiffany still has a belt, right? Okay, he's got it. Becky's got the IC title. Gotcha. Okay. Okay. And I think, honestly, on the opposite end of the spectrum of what I'm talking about here is the big main event match between Cena and Punk. Now, you can't make the argument that Cena and Punk has not tried very, very hard to build on their history. Guys, I know who the champs are. That was being sarcastic. So yeah, they've been playing on the history, and to the point that last week's big angle on SmackDown was John Cena doing like an authentic cover of the pipe bomb. What do you guys make of that? What do you guys make of Cena's pipe bomb? That was okay. Actually, that was pretty good. Like, I'm not going to say it was bad. I'm going to give some hot take and say it sucked. But it's not like the greatest promo of all time. It's not the greatest, one of the great work shoot promos. It didn't save the turn. If anything, it kind of like made me curious of what direction they're freaking going in, because why are they still doing the Shades of Grey thing with Cena and trying to get him over unless they're ending the heel turn, which is a possibility. We're at the halfway point, as Cena has pointed out. But it was all right. It was all right. The points made towards Punk felt very on point. I felt like it very much, and that was maybe my problem with it, is that it echoed like the online discourse towards Punk, which I don't think is helping things. And it's another problem I have with the Cena heel turn, is that it's become a heel turn. Like some people have said, I've heard Brian Zane say this and others, and the very on point with this part of why the Cena heel turn isn't resonating, because it's very samey, it's very paint by the numbers. But I would almost counter that by saying, well, no, it's an entirely meta thing. It's so meta that it actually just doesn't work on the show. Well delivered though, liked it, and I like the parallel with truth and someone being put through a table and all of those things. I don't really know what Truth's role is anymore. It's great when he shows up, but he's like doing like. Does he think that Cena has the 24/7 title? Is that what's happening here? Also, like the Punk Cena thing, to be clear, and it's got like a full month of build. But ask yourself honestly, is this match on this card the epic encounter that you might have envisioned when you first got the idea of a John Cena heel retirement tour? Is this exactly how you thought it would pop off? Exactly. I don't know, Fernando. That's a good theory. Fernando says, I think Triple H told Cena to teach Punk a lesson for leaving a long time ago. Wouldn't shock me. And Azan, that's exactly what I'm getting at. It feels super rushed. Yes, it's been given a month to build, which actually would be longer than the original Money in the Bank one that we're always praising. But at the end of the day, this match, just like Cody versus Orton, feels like it's just a victim of the calendar. Except for it's not like in the past where it was this being a slave to the calendar because it was like it's Hell in a Cell month or it's Elimination Chamber month or it's TLC month. No, it's Saudi Arabia month. So we have to pretend like we organically have this massive card with these massive matches right now, which only serve to really make the week-to-week television look nauseating. Just going back and forth, as I'm saying, with no real build or trying to figure out where we are with these feuds. And maybe I'm just getting too old and bald and I can't follow all these things at once. And we should only pay attention to certain storylines. But no, the timing doesn't feel right. Exactly, Azan. It feels rushed. And on top of that, it's not like, again, this is chapter 1. No, again, I will stipulate this. The winner does not have to face Cena or whoever will be the champ at SummerSlam. But essentially, though, because of Triple H's insistence on these tournaments and what they're doing them, you can kind of earmark the champion is always going to have to flip on the calendar because it's SummerSlam to face the King of the Ring winner. So once again, next month, we're under the tyranny of the calendar, just like we were back in the day with the gimmick pay-per-views. So this year, my problem with Saudi is that it's kind of becoming a gimmick pay-per-view. And the gimmick is like, it's a main event gimmick. We have to have these needlessly big cards and we completely hotshot ruin everything. Not even Bill Goldberg did this much damage. So E has a general question here on Punk, and let's entertain this for a second before we talk about SmackDowns. E asked, do y'all think a good chance Cena might leave with the title depending on who his last opponent is? Because he ain't losing matches on this tour. I could see Ron Killings winning it. Now Punk. So I have a few thoughts on that. At this point, if I have a take on that in a second, boss. At this point, unless it's going to be Cody Rhodes and they're really doing some kind of slow burn where he stays in proximity with him and then gets like his title back to his kingdom, has a babyface really emerged to take the title off of Cena? I don't have that person. Like there's people, there's the Jacob Fatu's of the world, there's the LA Knights of the world, there's the people on the mid part of the card or the upper mid card that are doing really well right now. There's Rob Breaker, but do any of these people seem like they're going to be the guy to give the Cena last title transfer to? No, I don't see it. I also don't really see him going through with this and them leaving with the belt. I feel like they will. I don't know what it's going to be, and kind of going against everything I said earlier to be sort of submissive to Papa H. There, like I think they'll probably figure it out. However, I wouldn't put it past them. Like it wouldn't be a 0% chance in my head that he actually would just take the belt and somehow this leads to an elevation of the other belt and they go back to a singular world title. I mean, they'll just manufacture another belt in a couple months because they never actually stick to that. But I think it's greater than non-zero that happens, but highly unlikely. I've seen this around a few places. People predicting that Punk wins the championship from Cena, and that Seth cashes in it. Despite everything I said earlier about like the King of the Ring feeling a little weird because it's full of these main eventers, I think you can kind of make a counter argument in some ways to Seth holding the Money in the Bank in that like him cashing in on either one of the champions, but him playing into the storyline and it sort of being the remedy for a finish or something, like these crutches that Money in the Bank does tend to yield. Having Seth in that role makes those things not feel as cheap. You know what I mean? Like it makes it it makes it so you can actually, I think, make good use out of the Money in the Bank this year based on where we are in storyline with those guys, where Seth is positioned. I think that works a little bit better than the typical mid-carder who wins the Money in the Bank, loses all their matches, and then, swoops in on the wounded champion. I think this ridiculously heel at the top of the card, Seth Rollins, can kind of get it done. Yeah, it's odd, Eek. I was thinking that a lot lately, how I think the Bloodline storyline is supposed to be like an inversion of the Shield for Roman, and that's why it ends with Seth and all of that. I think it's almost they're trying to do a repeat with Seth, and it's like it's also you have to sort of reconcile your sins or what you did as the Money in the Bank briefcase winner. It is a totally different version though of Seth, but man, we can't be and we had this was it this week, right? Did we start off with the Seth promo this week? We can't be starting off Raw with these long. Hey, I'm gonna talk for 35 minutes like Triple H did. Don't insult me. Don't you know my wife? She's the game. I don't know what Triple H was saying there. That's the risk that you always run with anything you do with Seth. Is every time Seth's like in a main event type of position, they tend to position him as being completely incompetent. Even when he's a babyface. Less so when he's a babyface, but even then. All right. We've got a few more minutes here. Want to get you guys on time to a normal Dynamite this week. What do you guys think of the show from Arena Mexico last week? I thought that was a fairly entertaining wrestling show. Not a ton of storylines. I still think AEW is on their sort of positive ascent. The main storyline with Hangman and Swerve, Ospreay and Mox, I'm kind of digging. Overall, good vibes. I like the Tony Storm, Monet stuff. Good little promotion. That's not patronizing, but no, they're doing all right. They're okay. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But speaking of weekly wrestling television shows, this Friday will seemingly represent the end of an era. It's a big time era. It is the end of the 3-hour Friday Night Smackdown era. A god awful era of SmackDown. Just mind numbing television on a night that you don't really want to watch wrestling. And these POSs, man, they're putting the Cody segments, the Cena segments, deep into these shows. It's like, come on, I gotta watch the Thunder and the Pacers here. I'm like one of the 5 guys that did that before Game 7, and instead I'm just stuck on like Solo Sokoa doing something, and like I know LA Knight's getting a good reception right now. He's a really good performer, but I just associate him with my brain melting and opening promos, and it's been as bad as Raw was 3 hours for all those years. How was SmackDown for like a few months? Way worse. I think the answer is the fact that they didn't boost the roster despite moving the time. It actually shortened the time on Raw, which has just been odd. Do you think Raw would be going through a renaissance right now? Raw's actually good on a week-to-week basis. It's the booking, the storylines aren't exactly the greatest in WWE. No non-PLV pay-per-views should be. I know, and then we have the short pay-per-views now. It's very weird. You have pay-per-views where people are wanting more. That's always been out of balance with me. That when the weekly television shows are longer, they have multiple ones. So that's the end of a SmackDown era. What I want to do now is I want to think about and reflect on the whole. I wouldn't say the horrible, but the less than fun eras of SmackDown, like when the show has just not been great. I think there's a little bit different dynamic between Raw and SmackDown in this respect, is that like even in times where Raw hasn't been great, until the last couple of years, Raw was still always like the focused show. So it was always the, as they used to call it, the flagship show. And even when it became the B show over the last couple of years at different points, it still kind of feels like the flagship and the thing that they cared about. So it never really had this danger of falling into something irrelevant. SmackDown has not been so lucky over the years. Every now and then, SmackDown falls into some really, really dark times. So I thought today what we do in celebration of the end of this one era of SmackDown is that we would go through some of the darker, harder to get through eras of SmackDown, as told through like the stars, the general vibe, and the pay-per-views that kind of surround it as a way of marking the eras. Because it's hard to like recap. Oh yeah, SmackDown was great from like, September 2nd, 2008 to November 2019. Some people could do that, but I'm not that smart. So instead, I'm going to earmark these by like the pay-per-views that kind of surround these eras. If that doesn't make sense to you, just stay quiet. All right. So the first era I want to point out, and I should set the stage here. SmackDown, I think, was a really good show for its first like 5 or so years. It really, I talk about this all the time. I didn't have access to cable television as a kid, so I would see Raw on like the Saturday shows. But my weekly wrestling show for years was SmackDown, and I ended up being very partial to a lot of early SmackDowns. That is my own bias peeking through a little bit, but also I think in general it was just a pretty good show. Sometimes it would be the B show, but that wasn't meant to be the name that it was an irrelevant show. It was just a show that wasn't quite as big as Raw, even though more people had access to it. It didn't quite have the cachet of cable television. And I think if you look at the show, it's pretty good through the Attitude Era. The Attitude Era is what it is. It's solid in the Invasion, just as good as Raw. You can argue better on some weeks. And then it's really the show that anchors the really awesome wrestling era that we got post Attitude, kind of before John Cena. But that lands us on what I'm going to call the first era of groan-inducing SmackDown, and that would be what I'm talking about here. The post-Great Wrestling era of SmackDown, which I'm marking that time by like Great American Bash 2004 all the way to about No Mercy 06. Now, that might seem like, how the hell am I defining that as an era? But let me explain. As I just mentioned, the era that preceded this on SmackDown, we think about it as the SmackDown 6 era, but it went a little longer than just the SmackDown 6. But that's the Heyman era of SmackDown, and that's really the era where SmackDown got the reputation as the wrestling show, in contrast to Raw, that was the storyline show. And this is the era where Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Brock Lesnar, Kurt Angle, Benjamin and Haas, all of those guys, as Fernand's pointing out, the Ruthless Aggression era, which is kind of what I'm pointing out here, or I'm referring to as the post-Great Wrestling era. I don't like Ruthless Aggression in general as a premise, Fernando, and because I think it's very ill-defined. People can argue about the start of the Attitude Era. You can go WrestleMania 13, you can go Survivor Series 96, you can go WrestleMania 14, but pretty much everyone agrees it ends at WrestleMania 17. I don't feel like there's enough consensus on the parameters of where the Ruthless Aggression and the PG, the Reality, and the Ren, or whatever all those eras are. I don't think we have good enough clarity on those eras, so I tend not to use that terminology, but you are essentially right. And if you look at it, this era to me is defined on SmackDown by them still trotting out big marquee names. This is where Cena rose before he was swapped out for Batista. And even though we've talked about that before, and we're actually almost 20 years to the day this week on that happening, although it ended up being a demotion for Batista and a promotion for Cena, it wasn't necessarily seen as such back then. And so I look at this era. If you look at the main event, it's still a top tier era in terms of main event talent, with an exception. The exception being, you also have the JBL stuff happening in this time period. That's where the JBL run is, that leads to the Cena run, which does not scream great wrestling in any way. And I think this is an era where, when JBL is the champ, when Booker T wins the King of the Ring and becomes the champ, when you realize that that Cena or Batista has become lesser than Cena, where SmackDown really starts getting a identity as a B show. I think the champions that they selected in this time period were the B champions. And that's not necessarily a knock on that time. And as some of you guys are putting in the chat, like you're saying, Fernando, SmackDown was fire at this time. I don't think it was necessarily horrible, but I think it felt very low rent. The next era I'm going to point out, which is coming it's actually continuous with this era, is what I'm going to call the big guy / little guy era, which I am earmarking as happening from No Mercy 06, which is my arbitrary line. But I do think that started into this era all the way through to WrestleMania 25. Now, the reason why I call this big guy, little guy era is, one, there's some huge physiques at this time. This is the era of The Undertaker. Got you, Fernando. I think you were praising the JBL era. This is the era of Khali and Batista, and sometimes Kozlov and The Undertaker, and even some other people that caught up with some signature pharmacy stuff. It's a lot of the underdeveloped giant people on this show. There is other guys and lesser talent that rises through SmackDown at this time, such as Jeff Hardy, CM Punk, Rey Mysterio every now and then, although he's on Raw a little bit in this era. He pops up. So there are smaller acts. And again, I think at this time there's almost this gulf on the show where the top stars were top stars. But then after that, everyone underneath seemed like they were so far down the totem pole. They were nowhere near in the pipeline. If you were in the pipeline, it felt like you were on Raw. If you were on this show, you were slightly elevated from ECW. And the reason why I have WrestleMania 25 as my earmark of this era is, to me, SmackDown still had a little bit of cachet. Even if they moved over to My Network TV, which was a lesser network than the CW, they were still a network, though. It was still a show with cachet. And when they moved over to My Network, they actually took Triple H with them. Remember that, after Triple H made a big statement about not being drafted to SmackDown because it would have been a demotion in 04. Suddenly, like, we needed his presence in 09 with the new network going on. But I don't think people really recall this. You have the big WrestleMania 25 snooze fest with Orton and Triple H. Technically, that was like an inter-brand feud, and that kind of mattered a little bit back then. But it was wild because that was the Triple H era into that title run until the feud happened with Orton, and like Triple H kind of just got absorbed, I want to say, onto Raw. It might have been a little more organized. There might have been a draft or a superstar shakeup or something happens. But I kind of think that ended that show being very main event worthy at that point. Two interbrands as world champs on both shows. Doesn't seem like a good formula, does it? Mm-mm. The next era is a long era, and you can disagree on some parts of this, and there's a little bit of nuance here. I'm calling this era the Big Gold B Show. So what I'm talking about is WrestleMania 25 all the way through SummerSlam 2016. So you got 09 to 2016. This is the longest single clump here, and I think you can argue, I know you can argue, that it should be two different time periods, but I'm lumping it all into one. Because I think when I tell you about the whole idea of it being a B show, obviously there was cachet with Triple H as the champion. But after a while, that the big gold belt eventually settled back onto SmackDown, mostly. And it kind of became, even as the brand split was waning and waning and waning, it became the clear number 2 belt. Kind of the role it has these days as the glorified Intercontinental run. And so I associate this era of SmackDown as it just being, as I said, the Big Gold B Show. It doesn't really say to the quality. It's just this champion and this championship didn't mean as much. And it was never as clear as it was during this time period when Mark Henry held it. Big Show held it a few times. Alberto Del Rio had it. Christian had it. We talked about that last time we were on here. What a big deal that was. But it's still very second tier. Now, to the point that in 2013, the Big Gold gets absorbed and we have one champion for a couple of years until we get to the rebrand splitted era that is represented with SummerSlam 2016. Technically, like, the draft happened before Battleground, but SummerSlam 2016 is the first real show in the new time, in the new era, with the multiple brands. You get the debut of the Universal titles, the uncoupling, or not really uncoupling, but the addition of a title. And we've been in that dance of one champion, two champions. We're unifying them, but we're going to create another one. I don't either, Fernando. I really, really don't. And it's funny because, like, I can't stand the Big Gold like that, or the title, the Gunther title they have now. I would have way less problems if the Gunther title was just actually the IC title and it was elevated to that level. And I don't know why. I don't know what weird little wrestling nuance that sets off in my brain, but it just does. SmackDown has no real identity, though, in this era, especially in the later period, at all. Until, I would say, an era I'm not including on this, because if you notice, this has all basically been continuous, which would be the SmackDown Live era. I think SmackDown, once again, once given just sort of almost equal nourishment as Raw, it was still the B show, but it was the much better show and had, like, the much better wrestling. It didn't always have the bigger stars, but it was kind of creative where they used Cena and AJ and some of those guys on that show. Nothing but respect to the not the best era ever, but nothing but respect to the salad days of SmackDown Live. It's a good times, like both personally and on TV. Those are good times. So that's the first era I'm taking off this list if you're following the chronology. But shortly thereafter, this time period of golden era, I'm going to say only lasts for about 2 years. Because I'm going to bookend the next era, and I'm going to call it the byproduct, really, of a bad product. So WrestleMania Orlando, I always lose track of the number of that one. I think it's 33. And Clash of Champions 2019, a card I know none of us remember, but it happened in late September of 2019, which is right before October 4th or 6th, one of those dates in 2019. Now, one of those dates in 2019 is the debut of SmackDown on Fox that we talked about a couple weeks ago, where Kofi Kingston gets squashed for the title, and we forget that he was ever the champion. So I earmarked this. This was a bad like era in WWE. This is the era where like the McMahons had to come on TV and tell you they were sorry for doing such a bad job, even though it was Baron Corbin's fault. That's this era. This is like the start of the Saudi era. That's all of this stuff happens right here. Kind of the peak of the groaning Vince time. It's like we're post 2014 through 2016, which kind of like 04 was like another wrestling renaissance era where the storylines weren't great, but the wrestling, the bell-to-bell wrestling was really good. But the indie influence was kind of taking over, and we got to see that. Now, WrestleMania 33, or all the bosses telling me it's 34 in the chat, but I want to say 34 is New Orleans. The reason why that, to me, symbolizes the end of that era of SmackDown is that actually ends with the Bray Wyatt Randy Orton match, which Randy Orton on SmackDown in that time period, despite having like those red shining things in his eyes, that was another revival of SmackDown that was happening in that time period. But right from there, it just falls into Orton versus Jinder. Shinsuke versus Jinder. It's the Jinder era of SmackDown. If you want to know where that all lines up. Now, there are other cool eras in there. There's an AJ era that wasn't bad, and there's a Daniel Bryan era that wasn't that bad. But overall, the product just isn't very good, and SmackDown kind of going along with that, and it ends with that horrible SmackDown in October that I would say we will never forget, but WWE seemingly forgot about it like 5 minutes after it happened. Oh, I want to hinder Jinder. I'm going to hinder Jinder for sure. Ginger Mahal, isn't that? Didn't Eva Marie refer to him as that? What's Eva Marie been up to? She's not making a comeback or something? She's on the board at TKO. And the last era is the one that we are just coming out of. The 3-hour B show era. And if you follow the chronology, it's basically Bash in Berlin. So August. SmackDown wasn't great post WrestleMania after WrestleMania 40, but it was just sort of at the water level of the rest of the promotion. All the way through Night of Champions. SmackDown has been god-awful. And I'm sorry Solo Sikoa had to become the face of it, but he's like the clearest representation of this. It's like a lame duck period for a network they're going to be on for years and years. But we've been on a lame duck period with these 3-hour SmackDowns that are thankfully coming to an end. So my prognostication is that if history is any indication, we are on the precipice of a golden era, an absolute renaissance in SmackDown. Mark it down. Go to the betting window. I don't know how you can bet on if SmackDown's going to be good for the next couple of years, but if a casino's dumb enough to take that bet, go ahead and place that bet. This is not gambling advice. We are not sponsored by a casino. One last thing I want to discuss with you guys today. And this is something that popped up on my radar is I was scrolling through Reddit at work because I'm bored and a bad employee. And there was a deleted post that someone had put up on a Tampa Bay Reddit, not wrestling related, but it was the screenshot of it was reposted on a wrestling Reddit. And I just thought of something that fit perfectly. I want to talk about some wrestling legends and what they're up to, and a certain business opportunity that I think has presented itself. So let me show you guys. So someone on Reddit asked, does Ric Flair keep coming into your restaurant and shitting himself? Man has shit himself like 6 times this year, drunk ASF at bars and other restaurants. He gets thrown out of watered street places all the time. Anybody in the service industry having to deal with this shit too? Now, this was deleted fairly quickly on the Tampa Reddit, but on the wrestling Reddit, there was tons of comments, and many people say that they've had this exact experience with Flair. But I also saw this morning this headline you're seeing on the right. This post courtesy of Cultaholic. Hulk Hogan's opening a bar opposite Madison Square Garden. Now, I've seen people of Hulk's persuasion. They're very uneasy about New York right now. Maybe it's not the place to do business, brother. But you're a Tampa guy, Hulkster. You're a Tampa legend. And I know those neighborhoods you grew up in. That's what really set your stage, Hulkster. So I'm just thinking, here's an idea, brother. I'll talk to Eric Bischoff. We could be successful at this. But how about you open a bar and grill in Tampa, Hulkster, and you let Ric Flair come and eat and drink whenever he wants. He could be slamming real American beers, defecating all over the place. What do you think, Hulkster? You like this business proposition? It's a winner. Have Bischoff tell you it's a winner. And I'm sure you'll agree to it. That was immature of me. That was immature and petty. I don't apologize for it, but it was immature and petty. No, he can't. That's why I don't feel bad piling on him. Like, I get it. He's in his 70s. He had a scare with his surgery apparently a couple weeks ago. But he stays in the public eye. He's becoming like a political figure. He's a lifelong record of being a piece of crap. So, yeah, I think Hogan's fair game. On that chipper note, let's go watch Dynamite, guys. Thank you, Fernando. Thank you, E. Thank you, the boss. Thank you, Azan. Thank you, Jermaine. Thanks, Nadir. Thanks, Leo. Thank you, all of you who tuned in to another excited edition of the Nocturnal Knockout. No, Azan, I don't care about Real American Freestyle. They've sold a lot of tickets, though. I saw that this morning. Have a good rest of your night, guys. Enjoy Dynamite.